Hi again, everyone. I am back for part two of my my attempt to paint more of an atmosphere than an object. So a painting, or all parts of the painting, are intended to dance together to create an overall effect rather than just focusing on one thing. As I said, I'm going to just start at the top and try to do a big graded wash over everything. This is a little bit of a Holbein color, a mineral violet, but I put a little bit of neutral tint in. I want just a dusky, slightly violet background because there are going to be a lot of blues, teals, turquoise tonalities, and I think just a blush of violet in the sky will help set them off nicely. As I said, I'm working at a steeper angle than usual, but I've got my board fixed so that with my left hand fixed to my paper fixed to a board, so that I can, with my left hand, tilt the board up or down easily to increase or decrease the amount of gravity. I'm using a pigment I never used. This is all new to me, so we'll see. But Daniel Smith sent me this. It's an ultramarine turquoise. I don't know that I'm promoting it. I haven't really used it, but I think for this particular painting, it may be the way to go. I think for the distant hills, I'm painting this up into the wet skies so that I don't get a hard edge, that I can get a transition, of course, from the sky to the distant hills, but that it's softer, a little bit more obscure, even than the photo shows. Looks a little fuzzier. That's by design. So that it looks far away, that it looks intentionally slightly out of focus. And that, all those choices, I think, will help emphasize, amplify the story I'm trying to tell. One of the end of the day, quietude. Now there's this ridge of hills that's just in front of the background hills. So for this, I'm using, well, right now this is just a little bit of ultramarine. Again, I'm dropping it into the wet turquoisey wash behind so that I don't have a hard break line. But I'm using not as much water for this slightly darker tone so that it doesn't run quite as much. And I've reduced the amount of gravity. I've lowered the board down so that it, when I drop a tone in like this, it stays closer to where I put it and doesn't run too much. Here and there, I'm making the decision to save out little sparkles of white as if houses in the distance, in the distant hills. I think I could easily overdo that, but I'll just save quite a few here and there, and then quickly, before it gets a chance to dry, I'll go back and edit them out if I think I need to. The whole point, too, is even though this ridge of hills is closer than that, of course, it's still in the distance, it's still far away, and to keep with the thematic point of the painting, I don't want anything really to be too crisp and clean, but clear, but definitely nothing this far away. So I'm imagining just a few of these little saved out ideas of buildings, houses, etc. will be enough. As this slightly more nearby ridge of hills comes down toward the water, I'm dropping in a little brown. This is a Van Dyke brown. I'm going to be using this minimally, I expect, but here and there throughout the painting, just as a subtle complement to all the greens and blues. This deep, rich, warm color, but it's fairly subtle, not too strident. Yeah, it's looking okay. I think this band ultimately wants a little more presence, but if I keep moving while it's wet, I should be able to do that. So again, we're coming down the hill, getting a little closer. Maybe I'm getting a little too finicky about this, but that's a little bit more of the Van Dyke brown, and I mixed just a tiny bit of neutral tint in to give it a little more presence. This is far away, and I want it to feel far away, so I'm trying to police myself to not be too precious or careful, but keep it loose and suggestive. For this painting, I do want a line where the land and water meet. I don't want to blend it all together. I just think graphically a slight line there will help. I don't want it pure white. So what I'll have to do is allow this to dry a bit and then wash over it with the watercolor to preserve a little of that bank showing. I just don't want that much of a jump in value is too strong. But I think I have a handle on what it should be or what I want it to look like. This is, again, little bits of neutral tint with a little bit of Van Dyke brown mixed in. I don't want to go too far with this brown, but the slight bump in value here is needed. It might seem quite dark, but it really won't be when this all sets and dries. Little bit additional blue. It's not especially difficult. I'm just trying to get it's just a bit of a balancing act to get the clarity jump, which is subtle, and then the value jump, which I need between this band of hills and that. So it has a little bit of clarity, but just enough, not too much. Value-wise, I think it's just about right. The distant hills, oddly enough, I think want to be a little darker, which is not tragic, but a little disappointing. Just because I love to nail the value the first time if I can, and often I don't. You know, fuzz that edge up just a little. So to that end, as a painter, you have to decide if you want to darken this band. First off, is it really necessary? I think that it is. When do I do it? Do I go in while it's still wet? Do I wait until it's completely dry? I think, given the aesthetic direction of this painting, I'm going to go in while it's still wet-ish. This area is not very wet. This area is wetter because I just misted it, but we'll see if I can do this. So I'm going to take a little bit of this new color. I'll blame it on the new pigment. And brush over that semi-wet area. The downside here is it's going to cause a hard line where it meets the sky, which I definitely don't want. But I think with my mist bottle, I can doctor that up. But in any case, I definitely needed the additional value. So there we go. We have a lighter mid-tone sky, slightly darker mid-tone turquoise background, and then medium to dark mid-toned closer band. All of that's fine. What's not fine, again, as I said, is this harder edge. So I think with my mist bottle, I actually don't mind little bits of the clarity. So I think I'm going to go for a sort of a start and stop look. Well, there'll be a little bit of clarity of the hills, and then it softens out again. The good old watercolor lost and found edges. This is watered down violet. I'm just going to try to feather it up into the sky. Yeah, I actually like this better than I did before, so there's a nice variety of edges that all make this look far away and atmospheric, and kind of a nice toggling of violets, greens, blues, and browns. So, as I said a minute ago, I want to preserve this harder line where the water starts and the land stops, but I don't want that big value jump. So I will wash over that, but this has to dry first, which unfortunately means I think I have to rely on the hair dryer, which I hate, but so be it. This should be dry enough. Yeah, the overall tonality of the water, I think, slightly darker. The solid mid-tone here, slightly lighter through here, just to leaven that somewhat darkness. A little bit of a light glow in the water, and then I want to darken the bottom bits of the water. Similar to the reference photo, but not entirely the same. I'm going to try to redesign it all to make my painting work. So, color-wise, I'm going to use a bit more of this cobalt turquoise. I don't love mixing colors in my palette first, but I think I want to knock it back with a little bit of violet. Again, I'm going to wash right over the bottom part of that landmass. Over the boat too, because it doesn't matter. Not bad, but I think it wants to be duskier. What I don't want is a hard line there, so a little mist bottle will bleed those tones together. All right, so right at the land, I think I'm going to drop in a little bit of violet just to make that water tone there a little duskier. Then I'm going to lighten it up pretty quickly. This is a cobalt teal blue, Daniel Smith color. Really, and then I'm just washing it down and adding water to the brush so that I can hopefully get this organic looking lighter band through the center. I can wash over much of the boat. It's going to be darker, but it's a pretty simple shape, so I can paint around it if I think I'm going to save any white bits or lighter bits on it. Some I'm definitely not, but here and there I know that I will. Now at this point of the water, I want it to start to get darker to hug the bottom of the painting. So I'm going to use the same violet that I used upstairs in the sky. Tilting the board up, more gravity to allow these tones to run down together. Yeah, that's okay. This is again, I mixed in the palette, which I rarely do, but cobalt manganese, cobalt blue, manganese. Then more violet. The left side of this boat is going to be quite dark, so I think it's better at this point to just paint over it. It'll help get those dark tones that are coming started. Tilt the board around a little to encourage all that to run together. We don't want that streak. Soften the bottom of the boat because I want a very purposefully indistinct. I want no line between the bottom of the boat and the reflection, so I want that to all just grow together. Put a little French Ultra in there, which I think it's fine. It's a little too blue, but I think it'll be fine. This is more of that cobalt teal. Just trying to, while this is wet, darken up those values slightly near the foreground. Oh, I'm using this good old Arches paper. It's 140 pound, 300 gram, rough surface, Arches bright white. I was tempted to try a different kind of paper, something a little softer, but I thought this paper is pretty durable and it allows for some cleaner transitions often, so I opted to stick with it. Yeah, everything's okay. I like the general palette that's developing. I definitely want more value up here, but that should be easy enough to achieve. And I may have to rely on that noisy hairdryer again. I don't want to just yet, because this is such a wet wash, it'll kill all that nice granulation and cause streaks and gray spots. The top of this wash is almost dry enough that I could revisit it. It's a little bit risky, but I think I can be a risk taker. I'll live on the edge. I never feel like I have to go by anything the reference photo shows, but I just think compositionally the slightly lighter band of water in the horizontal I think is quite beautiful. It keeps the striation of horizontal banding, so I'm going to mimic something like that in my painting. So to that end, I'm going to use a flat brush and make, I hope, a relatively subtle but graphic horizontal band. Just let it fade out. And then wash up into it. It's all good, except I want a slight bit of clarity here, but not as much here. So again, my old mist bottle will come in handy. Just to soften that half of it a little. Then, I always like to try to tell you why I'm doing what I'm doing, but I'll be really honest. I was going to say I really don't quite know why I need to do this, but I wanted that slightly graphic edge of the landmass to show, but I think I want to obscure it a little by dropping in some of that grayed out tone from above and just connect those two areas of the painting a little bit more. If you get a bead of water that you're worried is going to backwash and cause a streak, just take a paper towel, pull the water out of a brush, and just touch it. Touch the slightly dry brush, and it'll siphon up the water and it'll help you avoid a world of heartaches. Oh dear. I did not see what happened there, but it looks like something dripped. I'm not going to panic. It's just still wet, so I can probably feather that away. Yeah, I really wanted this subtle horizontal graphic, this lighter band reading through, so the top part is okay. Now I think I want to create the same effect just below it. So back to this flat brush. This is more of that cobalt turquoise or ultramarine. What is it? Ultramarine turquoise. Daniel Smith never tires of inventing amazing colors and convincing us we all have to have them. That works, but now I want to lighten that up and then darken it again. So back to the smallish mid-sized mop, just clear water, just feather that out. Try to blend away that blotch, whatever that was. and then a bit more of this violet gray. All this water is pooling here, so I'm just pulling some moisture out of the brush and siphoning it up. If I don't, as that begins to dry, it'll leach back up into the wash and cause havoc. Lesser degree, but the same issue there. I think now what I want to do is add some of the initial tone to the hull of the boat so that it can wash down in and connects to the bottom while it's still quite wet. I want a little glow of light on this far side of the boat. So I'm going to save just a thread of pure paper. This is clear water. I didn't paint to the edge, so I can keep a slightly crisper edge just there. A little bit of light, but I'm going to drop in a bit of warmth. This is raw umber, so yellowish warm. I don't want too much yellow, but just a bit, and I want to allow that to run down into the water. Then I'm going to transition as the boat turns away from the failing light. It'll become a little bit violet. I think I'll drop in a little cobalt blue as well. This is starting to set, so I have to not stress out, but I do have to hurry so that I can connect all these wet parts as one before I get any kind of awful blossoms or streaks. But I really felt it was important to start laying in some of those tones so that everything could connect organically. Instead of painting the bottom, I'm going to just mist it. I think I don't want to add too much more value to the sides. The reflection when I'm finished will be fairly dark in parts, so I want to save some subtle light left and right. A little bit of gravity. Yeah, then overall I'm pretty happy with the base of the water. I think near the end of the process I'm going to drop in some of these exaggeratedly vertical reflections in the water that will help connect all parts, so there'll be a subtle horizontal reading and a more graphic dominant vertical read to the water. Started to get a few little streaks there. They're not tragic, and the reflection of the boat will probably obscure most of that, but I'm just going to try to feather in a little value to obscure those little imperfections. I think normally I wouldn't care at all, but like I said earlier, this painting has so few elements. They all have to look pretty bang on, or it's going to look what's the technical term? Oh yes, bad. We don't want that. Yeah, I look back at my older paintings, not even that much older, and one of the faults I have to admit I have been guilty of is overpainting certain elements. Often skies, but more often bodies of water. And by that I mean I just used too many brush marks, too much going on. If you're painting in watercolor and you're painting a body of water, the opportunity is there to just rely upon the fluidity of the medium itself to do a lot of these transitions. You don't necessarily need so many brush marks. Many of my paintings look like plaid shirts. I had so many stripes this way and then this way. They weren't necessarily badly painted, but they were decidedly overpainted. So for the last few years, I've been very dedicated to editing, minimizing, trying to use fewer brush marks whenever possible, or at least as few as I can. And again, I should say that's not the right way to paint. You can be a maximalist, you can do whatever suits you. But for my aesthetic, that's the direction I've been trying to go. This is still reasonably wet, so I'm just using a paper towel to feather out to make a slightly bit more subtlety to these the horizontal banding that I do have. I want it to be there, but very, very understated. It's risky to drag a paper towel over a wash that's still drying. But yeah, I'm just trying to soften the edge just ever so slightly. That's pretty good. So I think I will just let this dry. And I don't think I'm going to do much more to the water, save the dark reflections that will be coming later. The boat in the back, I just thought compositionally the painting needed it, but it really wants to belong to the background, not the foreground. So I'm going to paint it in subtle tones that I've already used, so it sort of blends in a bit, not jumps out. Minor little thing, which I probably shouldn't admit, but I dislike that. That looks a little ragged. Again, the simplicity of this water is paramount. So I'm going to do just a little on-camera surgery. See how well I can do this. Paper is not dry, but it's dry-ish. I just want to smooth out that slightly ragged edge. So a paper towel, just a slight bit of water on it. I'm using next to no pressure, but just yeah, it made a little glow in the water, which I really wasn't planning on, but I don't hate it at all. I'm going to smooth that out. better. Okay, so I think the boat I'm going to make grayed out cobalt. Honestly, doesn't matter too much, but just something bluish. I guess it would go without saying that if this were a different kind of painting, a bright sunny day, then you could imagine using a bright red or orange or something. But every decision in this painting has to be in service to the overall intent of the painting, which is to create a subtle, quieter, more calm atmosphere. So limiting the amount of colors, modulating the edges towards softer in general, and keeping the palette quite narrow as the range of values, all helps emphasize the big picture. I'm just going to give the slightest nod to a reflection. I don't want to make it too big a move or too fancy. Just understated. I guess to that end, the point would be, if you were sitting here on this beach looking out at this water, as I was, you kind of see the boat out there, but you kind of wouldn't see it too. It's there but not there. And that is one of the superpowers of watercolor. It can be brutally obvious, clear, apparent, and it can be very, very subtle and understated. And you can even have elements of both of those expressions in the same painting, and it can be quite beautiful. So yeah, I think that's all this boat needs. It's pretty subtle, but it wants to be. I'm going to find my small round brush and subtly, I hope, that's my goal, paint in the mast. So this is a Neef brush, round, very small, number 0. It's not a rigger, but it acts much like a rigger. So for a mast or line work, I mean, it isn't always a one size fits all, but I think in this case, trying to make a positive out of obscurity, I think to paint this mast in solidly would be wrong. So I'm barely touching the paper and making sort of a start-stop effect so that the viewer's eye can kind of fill in the blanks and they know what's going on without you having to illustrate it too much. And this sort of just a dry brush mark, very subtle, for a little nod at the rigging. I don't want to do any more to that. I think it doesn't deserve it. It doesn't want it. I think the reference photo shows a light at the top of the mast, but when I get to that point, I'm going to ignore that. I think putting a light way up there would be distracting. Yeah, it's pretty good. I think that's enough. I find myself obsessing over the shoreline a little bit. I'm not 100% satisfied with it. I think it isn't bad, but I think it could somehow be a little better. But I must police myself that I don't, again, do too much. So these bits of land, I guess, that just come right down to the water, I'm going to, here and there, strengthen. With this very small mop brush and back to this tiny round brush. This is the Van Dyke Brown, a little bit of French Ultra mixed in it, but just because it was in the palette. And here I'm just going to give a hopefully extremely subtle nod to a bit of reflectivity. I'm really trying to do is to connect the parts of the painting, the land to the water, a little bit better than I had. Yeah, I think it's pretty subtle stuff, but I think that helps. And by policing myself, what I mean is I'm aware anything I do at all back here, anything, will drive a little bit more attention to that and away from this. And that's not always bad. This is not the big star of the show, the whole painting. But I want very much for everything back here to look very much back there and not pull forward too much. But I think I know what I'm doing. I think this makes sense. All right, I think that's enough of that. Now it's time to turn attention to this boat. It is forward, it is a little more focal, but again, as I keep saying, this isn't just a painting about this boat. Because it's forward, and just compositionally, I think it does need a little more heat on it. But to keep it looking as if it's orchestrated and part of the whole big picture, as it were, I'm going to use, if a different kind of painting, I would use very bright colors, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to use the same palette as I used for everything else, but probably a little crisper and a little darker here and there. So this is a little bit of the Van Dyke Brown and neutral tint, a little outboard motor out back. So I hope it was clear what I meant by that. To try to get this boat to look like it's part of a bigger picture and not the focal point of the whole painting, I'm going to use tones and colors in the same family as what I have been using for everything else. And hopefully by doing so, it'll look like, it'll help it make it look like an overall composition and not just a focal point. A little bit of a delicate balance. It would be very easy to over detail or over color this boat, and it might not look bad, but I think it wouldn't make the painting as strong as if I do my utmost to keep everything simple. Even here, where it's quite close up, there'll be areas I expect that'll be crisper and more defined, but I want other areas that run together and bleed together. It is quite low light, so even though it was quite close to the shoreline, you couldn't see it all that well, and that was kind of cool. That's just straight cobalt. I'm going to just let these tones all run together here and there. I'm tempted to save a little white glint on the upper edge. I think because I'm unsure whether I should or I shouldn't, it'd be best to do so, to leave it as white, and then if it looks too graphic or too much, I can always get rid of it. But if I paint it out completely, it'll be gone for good. I think already I can tell that there's too much white showing there for the style of painting I want to do, but really not a problem. You can always get rid of light, but you have a much harder time reclaiming it or adding it back once it's gone. Internally, I'm sensing myself being a little too careful, so I took a number 4 round, not a very big brush, but bigger than I was using, and I'm just using a bit more water and just painting things a bit more fluidly, allowing them to just run together. So again, a little clarity on this boat I think is needed, but too much, it's going to make it look too focal and too much like an illustration, less like a painting. Here in New York, there's this unbelievably amazing exhibition of John Singer Sargent in Paris, currently showing at the Metropolitan Museum. I've been a few times, but as is often the case there, it's so crowded you can't see that much. But I went the other day with a friend, and the exhibit's been up for a while, and in any case, the museum wasn't so mobbed for once, so you could really spend time and get up close to the paintings. And every time I see his work, there's something else I tend to learn. And I think my big takeaway, well, first off, I should say, I will never be John Singer Sargent. None of us will, nor should we want to. But there are lessons you can learn from painters, well, from all painters really, but from a painter like that, who is so prolific and so successful. But I started off just being really, really taken with his compositions in a way I wasn't before, or in a different manner. And I was trying to think, what is it? He had an amazing sense of composition. The way he would use negative space as part of the overall narrative of the painting. So this isn't just true in his landscape works or his watercolors, but in some of the more formal studio portrait works, I was really taken with the amount of space he would show around his figures. Like, sometimes quite a huge amount of air. Whereas I, or many other people, might have wanted to crop much closer, or edit out some of these big, I wouldn't call them extraneous, but what one might think of as too much space around the subject. He didn't do it willy-nilly. It always seemed to have an intention. It always seemed to serve a purpose. It always resonated. It wasn't always obvious to me, but it always resonated. So in a way, I credit him with this demonstration. I am no John Singer Sargent, but the ideas that started to rattle around in my head about the way we appreciate or look at the world around us is not just by the object or the thing or the person we may be focusing on, but about the space it occupies and its relationship, its dialogue with the space that it occupies. It was amazing. It was quite a revelation. And I've seen his work, many of the same works, hundreds of times. And in a whole new way, it jumped out at me as a new concept. Not a new concept, but newly appreciated, stronger idea than I had previously understood it to be. That is not to say you should always use giant, expansive compositions with lots of negative space. Not at all. It's just the whole idea was considering it. Like, how close do you crop in? How much atmosphere or space do you want your subject to be in dialogue with? Unbelievably powerful to me. All right, this shadowier side of the boat, I'm going to paint it in blues. This is ultra blue, and then some browns, I think, as it gets down closer to the water. I don't know why I'm doing this. It's a tie-off rope that I painted positively there and negatively here. I think for the nature of this painting, that might be a little fussy and unnecessary, but again, I can get rid of it if I want to. It's sort of a habit I think I have. Not necessarily a bad one, but I don't know in this case if it really brings a lot to the party. That said, it's pretty minor. So yeah, the upper part of this is quite blue. The lower part toggles into deep brown. We'll see if that was a good choice. Yeah, I think so. Now the task is to paint this side of the boat as if it curves around from lighter to darker and then connect it up with the reflection. I'll take this smallish Neef brush, one of mine, and do what I just did earlier, but a little bit darker. Clear water. A little bit of raw umber, just a dash of warmth, which I think will be nice, singing off all this field of cool. Bit of blue that almost goes green there, but I think that's fine. It's sort of in the palette of the whole painting. Then violet. And a little bit of brown. The same brown, but maybe not as intense. The actual physical color of the boat doesn't matter that much, but I think it's probably white. It does have a band along the waterline painted in dark red, which I haven't yet decided how to handle. Of course, I don't feel an obligation to mimic that just because it's in the photo, but I'm wondering if a darker tone or maybe a complementary tone would actually help the painting. Not convinced it will, but we'll see. There's this amazingly appealing, I think, sense glint of light that hits this the ridge, but I don't think we need all of it showing, but just a little. But anyway, now before this dries, I have to paint the reflection. And let it leach up into the hull of the boat, so the reflection and the boat become one. Very zen. Which is another way to de-emphasize the object and play up the atmosphere and the connection of object to environment. Here I'm using lighter tones. I dropped in a little bit more of that raw umber, just to brighten a little bit subtly the reflection on the sunnier end of the boat. I can become a little too literal about these things, and that's fine in some cases, but I think here that's not what I want to do. I'd like to keep this loose and suggestive and not as literal as I might normally tend to get. So I'm going to go to a more mid-sized mop brush. This is neutral tint and ultra blue. More water, more pigment. And just get this whole area a little juicier. As it comes down, I want to be even less literal about it, so I'm going to just dry brush some gestural marks off to the side. And I think you can probably guess what I'm going to do, but I'm going to grab my mist bottle and just let these tones run together. Again, emphasizing atmosphere over description. That's a little unfortunate, but not tragic. Yeah, the mist bottle is such a salvation, but also it has its downsides. For example, keeping a crisp edge here, I mean, it wasn't critical, but it was somewhat important. And the mist bottle, of course, added water, so that fuzzes up that edge. Then again, in this kind of painting, maybe that's not such a bad thing. I'm using more Van Dyke brown a bit, a little more neutral tint, a little bit more ultra blue, just trying to obscure the line between boat and water, but also beef up the values just here in a general, less specific way, just allowing these tonalities to run together. And tilting the board up, higher, and down here and there, just to get the tones to run. Yeah, overall not bad. It's such a different kind of painting than I've done most of my life. I was so involved in very, very detailed, very explicit painting. So it's just such a joy to paint in a looser, wetter, juicier, less specific, more atmospheric kind of way. Yeah, so it's not to say, again, it's the right way to paint, but it's just another way to think about it. I'm at the point where I'm getting near the end. I have to think about these reflections. I don't use masking fluid typically. On rare occasion I will, but I tend not to use it because when you peel it off, it leaves such a hard line, and I'm so bad at using masking fluid that line looks generally unprofessional and unsophisticated. So I prefer saving white whenever I can. But to get the impression of these thin but fairly graphic verticals, lifting is one way, and I think I'll do a little lifting, and then I think I'm going to use a little bit of semi-opaque paint, Naples yellow, maybe a little bit some titanium white to get the effect of those reflections. I want some of them to be fairly long so they connect the various parts of the painting a bit compositionally, but I don't want them to be quite as strident or as necessarily as obvious as they are in the reference. But I think they'll be the last sort of finishing touch to this. The boat I want to assess. Generally, I think it came out relatively well. I think saving the white here, when I was doing it, I was convinced it was a mistake. But now that I see it, it's so little of it. Little glint there, here and here. I think I'll leave it. I think it's not bad. If it were more graphic or heavier, I think it would be a problem, but it's pretty minimal, so I think I'm going to try to be happy with it. It wasn't quite what I had planned, but I did it, and I think it looks good. I'm fussing over this edge, which is silly because it doesn't matter that much, but yeah, I just have to let this dry. I think the hair dryer will come out. The video length is just at the hour mark now. I'm trying really hard to keep these videos 90 minutes maximum for various reasons. I think the main reason is even if your attention span can handle it, they look great when I see my own playback. They're in high definition, but YouTube sometimes downgrades them if the file sizes are too large, and if they're longer than that, it's a problem. So I'm looking into what I can do about that. If anybody has any suggestions. I did learn that as I've gained a few more followers, YouTube does permit more bandwidth for my upload, so more often than not, they're closer to the way they looked when I filmed them. So I'm doing some reflections here. I've taped off, as you can see, some vertical stripes, and with a moist paper towel, I'm just doing some light lifting. It's not always the thing to do, but it can be really an effective way to imply a reflection. I'm going to put a light, I'm just inventing a light at the end of the boat here, I think. Then I'm going to put, I'm imagining a fairly assertive reflection here. I do not mind using little bits of opaque paint in the sense that I'm not a purist or feel that I have to follow some kind of arbitrary rule. That said, I do think in a transparent medium like this, the addition of opaque paint can look kind of awkward and clumsy. So although I'm not opposed to it, I try to keep it to a minimum. Just very small bits can look fine. But if you start relying on white paint, for example, to add light to your painting, it can look really bad really quick. Just very heavy and chalky. So yeah, well again, while I'm not opposed to it, I like to try to minimize the introduction of any opaque or semi-opaque. But this lifting is actually working quite well. It's one reason I wanted to darken this area, because I knew these reflections would need a little contrast in order to have any graphic weight at all. I may do a few more just with the light semi-opaque paint. Somehow, graphically, I'd like to get one coming down further. So I think I'm going to invent another light on the stern of this boat, maybe where the cabin is, where I've made up the cabin, that is, because I don't think there is a cabin, but there is now. If you do this, don't press, I'm just using regular Scotch masking tape. It's low tack. It's very inexpensive stuff. I buy it on Amazon or at the hardware store. It's all I ever use. It doesn't pull off the surface of the paper, at least if you use Arches, Saunders. If you use a very soft watercolor paper, any tape risks damaging it. Also, the washes under this are not 100% dry, so it's a little risky. So I'm not pressing it down hard, I just laid it on the surface. Yeah, I think that'll do. One thing I haven't addressed much, that water line of the boat. If you see here, it's a very deep red. Again, I don't feel obligated to put it there because the photo shows, but there's something satisfying about that deep value at the bottom of this band. I really feel like I want more value in there. So I'm going to, the back part of my brain, think about if I want to deal with that or not. I'm going to guess yes, but I want to figure out the best way for me to do it that's not going to look too specific or too overly graphic. Okay, so on a little piece of scrap paper, I put a little dot of titanium white and then a little bit of this. This is a Holbein Naples yellow. It's not opaque, but it does have a bit of opacity, sort of a semi-opaque. And even the titanium white, it's more of a semi-opaque. It's It is sort of a gouache, but not per se. I'm mixing the two. I'm trying to get a pale yellow tone. I don't want it to be too graphic, but I don't want it to be too white. So then I'm using this flat brush. It's a Perla by Escoda. It's the small flat. Adding just a little color, and over the surface of the rough paper, I'm just feathering it with my finger. I think that's fine. I think the look is good, but what I don't want is to become too precious or too fancy about it. I think it could easily start to look too illustrative. I don't know if this is a mistake, but I really wanted this long graphic. I think that one, against the dark, obviously reads a little better. So I think I'm using just a bit more pure titanium white here and there. Then I'm just going to feather it with my thumb so it looks a little more subtle and a little less obvious. Yeah, I think it's okay. A little sense of the light up in the cabin. Trying to be very almost abstract, not terribly fancy about this kind of thing. If you get most of the moisture out of this brush, you can do some beautiful dry brush scrape marks with it. As I remember from the reference photo, there's a lot more lights, especially along the waterfront. But again, as I said from the outset, I just want to get the spirit of them, not be that specific or illustrative about it. I think that would be a mistake. I was going to tone down some of the lights up in the hills, but I think generally they look okay. They're not too big or too hard-edged graphically, so yeah, I don't mind them. I think if they were too much more, they would be a little overwhelming, but I think that part I managed to get pretty well. A little of this vibe probably goes a long way, so I think I'll leave it at that. I'd love a little bit more connectivity, so I'm going to go back to the well of lifting and try to extend the graphic of some of these over these bits. To really play up the atmosphere, sure, but moreover, to hopefully better connect the various bands of the painting. These tones are lighter, so they won't show up quite as well, but I think they'll be good enough. Yeah, that helps. Graphically smaller, but I want to do the same thing here. should have anticipated this when I first did it, but I didn't. But I like to think that's one of the good things about my demonstrations, is that I am perfectly happy to talk to you about things that don't go quite right, and then I think it's helpful for everyone to see how I deal with it. Do I leave it? Do I live with it? Do I think it's a happy mistake? Do I try to fix it? If so, how do I do that? When I watch other people paint, I'm much less interested in what goes right than in what goes wrong, because something is always going to go wrong. And I love watching people deal with the unexpected or with so-called mistakes and just seeing how they roll with it. Anyway, that little tweaks I think helped. It just emphasizes the atmosphere, sure, but it does set up that connections that I really wanted. This long graphic, I'm not happy with it, if I'm honest. I think the yellow looks indecisive and murky. Had it been all white, I don't think it would look as bad, but the amount of contrast is indecisive and murky looking. So I'm just gonna lighten the center section. Take out some of that yellowish tonality. That looks better. And as it comes all the way down here, I just think it's not bad. It's just sort of neither here nor there. So not a big deal. Yeah, overall I'm liking it. I now just want to finish up by adding just a tiny bit more graphic identity to the boat. I'm going to do the waterline darker. Little bits of detail that you could argue I don't need. I didn't do them yet because, again, I was holding off on anything terribly specific to try to keep it from going into illustration land. But I think I'm good. So I have to find my flat brush. I want to put a little shadow under the ridge line along the hull. Color doesn't matter too much. It's a small area, so I'm just going to use some of this Van Dyke brown with a little neutral tint mixed in, and be a little bit graphically crisp about it on the brighter end, and then fade it out as it turns around into the shadows. Yes. This I wanted to dry a little darker than it did. Not tragic. Going to be very general about it. Then the very last thing, I want to do this water line at the bottom of the boat. My indecision comes with introducing that reddish tone help her make any difference whatsoever. I worry in general that it would make the whole enterprise look a little too illustration-like and a little too specific. And I really quite like the minimal palette here. But I think what I'm going to do is sort of split the difference. Much like the photo, it is red, but it doesn't look particularly red. It's quite shadowy. So I'm going to use a slightly larger flat brush by Perla. I'm going to use a dark tone of Van Dyke brown neutral tint, and I'm going to put just a tiny bit of alizarin crimson in. So it'll be a deep, deep, warm color. So not specifically red, but deep. And then I'm going to just dry brush it on so that it feathers out. A little heavier at the shadowy end. And overall, I can already tell, I think, not the color, but the values definitely needed in this part of the painting. I'm going to fuzz up that edge just a little. I don't want too much specificity there. I don't mind how that looks. That looks pretty good. But I gotta hurry because the dry brush expressions are fun to do, but they dry much more quickly because there's less water. So if you want to bleed them into another tone or area, you have to work fast. Yes, okay. Small mop. Gonna use a little of that same dark, warm tone, almost like a maroon, brownish red. Kind of unexpected, but I think I like it. Lead it right down into the reflection. Then toggle that into a deep blue, blue-gray, ultramarine. And then feather this out so it's not too crisp or too obvious. Missed the bottom again so that it just looks atmospheric. Just let gravity paint this area for me. But I think that really did help. It anchors the boat, connects it to the water, actually emphasizes the atmospherics. Really subtle addition of a little darker warm tone I think is not a bad thing at all. So overall, I'm pretty happy with the painting. I mean, in terms of it doing what I wanted it to do. As it dries up and I assess, I may do a few little things, but probably not too much. I wanted it to be simple, minimal elements, but all orchestrating, again, not to illustrate things as much as to illustrate or depict an experience, an atmosphere, an experience of atmosphere. And I think overall it works. The main thing is, I hope you all learned not just some technical things that you might want to employ, but some ways to think about your paintings and some ways to think about what it is you want to paint in this world or how you might want to go about painting them. So to that end, I hope this was enjoyable and helpful. But thanks so much for watching, and I'll see y'all again soon.